From fireballs and fatal crashes to career-ending blunders and bitter rivalries, Formula One isn't just a sport, it's a survival test at 300 kilometers per hour. These aren't just accidents. They're the moments that shook F1 to its core, forced rulebooks to be rewritten, and changed the lives of drivers forever. Buckle up, because what you're about to see is the brutal reality behind the glamour of Grand Prix racing. From Hamilton's horrifying collision to Verstappen's fiery pit lane incident, these are the terrible crashes that didn't just shake the world of Formula One, they changed it forever. Some led to tragic deaths, others to career-destroying reputations, and a few sparked rule changes that reshaped the very DNA of the sport. Let's kick things off with Fernando Alonso. In 2016, during the Australian Grand Prix, Alonso suffered a terrifying crash that looked straight out of a movie. Attempting an overtake at over 300 kilometers per hour, he collided with Esteban Gutierrez Haas. The impact launched his McLaren into the air, flipping violently before slamming into the wall and coming to rest upside down. It was estimated that he hit 45 to 46 GS during the crash. Miraculously, Alonso crawled out of the wreckage with only minor injuries. Later, he admitted, "I spent some of the luck I had left in life." But as bad as that crash looked, things got even worse further back in F1's timeline. Because what Jos Verstappen, yes, Max's father, went through in 1994 was nothing short of a nightmare. At the Hockenheim circuit, Jos came into the pits for what should have been a standard refueling stop. But as the nozzle connected, fuel sprayed all over the hot body of the car and ignited instantly. Within seconds, a fireball erupted, engulfing both the car and the mechanics in flames. Verstappen later recalled that everything suddenly turned black. He couldn't see, he couldn't breathe. Although he escaped with burns to his face, this disaster left a mark on the sport. Incredibly, pit stop refueling continued for years after, until 2010, when it was finally banned after a string of similar incidents. Jos survived the flames, but not everyone was so lucky. 1994 was also the year Formula One was shaken to its core at the San Marino Grand Prix. On Saturday, a relatively unknown Austrian driver named Roland Ratzenberger crashed during qualifying after suffering a front wing failure. His car struck the wall at nearly 200 miles per hour, and he died on impact. The paddock was in mourning, but worse was still to come. On Sunday, Ayrton Senna, a three-time world champion and legend of the sport, lost control of his car at the Tamburello corner and crashed into a concrete barrier at around 192 miles per hour. He died shortly after, and the entire motorsport world was left devastated. Senna had reportedly considered pulling out of the race due to Ratzenberger's death, but chose to race on. That decision cost him his life and changed Formula One forever. In the wake of the tragedy, the FIA overhauled F1's safety protocols. Stronger barriers, redesigned circuits, improved crash testing, mandatory wheel tethers, better helmets, and later, cockpit protection systems like the Halo. All of it was born out of that black weekend in Imola. But not all crashes that change the sport come with death. Some simply destroy reputations. And you already know who we're talking about. That's right, Nikita Mazepin. Say it sarcastically. The Russian superstar who took the F1 world by storm by spinning out on lap one of his very first Grand Prix. His career was plagued with controversies even before it began, and that opening race crash in Bahrain in 2021 sealed his fate as a meme more than a racer. Even Sergio Perez couldn't hold back, publicly calling him an idiot at the Portuguese GP. His teammate Mick Schumacher reportedly said he wanted to finish him. The relationship between the two collapsed, and Mazepin quickly became a punchline rather than a prospect. But while Mazepin's crashes were laughable, another Haas driver experienced one of the most horrifying moments in recent F1 history. During the 2020 Bahrain Grand Prix, Romain Grosjean collided with Daniil Kvyat on the opening lap and smashed into a barrier at over 130 miles per hour. The car split in two, erupted into flames, and Grosjean was trapped in the inferno for almost 30 seconds. Fans feared the worst, but somehow he emerged alive. He credited the halo for saving his life, calling it the best thing F1 has ever done for driver safety. The FIA's focus on safety tech, from the survival cell to fire-resistant suits, the Hans device, and rapid medical response, all worked exactly as intended. It was a miracle, but also a product of decades of hard-earned lessons. And speaking of bitter lessons, let's talk about Lewis Hamilton and Nico Rosberg. On the surface, they were a championship-winning duo at Mercedes. But behind the scenes, it was all-out war. Their rivalry peaked in 2016 at the Spanish Grand Prix, when they took each other out on the opening lap. Mercedes was furious. Rumors swirled that Hamilton threatened to leave the team. Niki Lauda admitted both drivers were pushing beyond reason and that the crash was inevitable. What made it worse was their history. Childhood. Friends turned bitter enemies, with a relationship so broken that it never truly recovered. But if you think that was bad, go back 40 years to one of the most brutal crashes in F1 history. The year was 1976, and at the treacherous Nürburgring circuit, Niki Lauda, yes, that Lauda, suffered a near-fatal accident at the Bergwerk corner. In wet and dangerous conditions, Lauda lost control, hit a barrier, and his car exploded in flames. Trapped inside, he suffered horrific burns to his face and lungs. He fell into a coma and was even given last rites, but somehow, he survived and returned to racing just 6 weeks later. The crash marked a turning point. Lauda, who had begged for the race to be cancelled beforehand, became a powerful voice for driver safety in the years that followed. But not every crash brings change. Some just bring memes. And Nicholas Latifi, or as the internet calls him, Goatify, became the unfortunate face of absurd F1 mishaps. In the final laps of the 2021 Abu Dhabi GP, Latifi crashed, triggering a safety car that would swing the championship away from Hamilton and hand it to Max Verstappen. Even though he apologized, fans never let it go. Then came Monaco, where he crashed behind the safety car behind it. And at the Japanese GP, he got lost on track and made a U-turn into a dead end. He later blamed a stuck throttle, even though by his own admission, the throttle wasn't stuck. Classic Goatify. No injuries, no damage to others, just a wrecked reputation. But not all crashes are funny. Some remind us of the brutal dangers still present. In 2019, young F2 driver Antoine Hubert died in a horrific crash at Spa after being struck by another car at high speed. His death left a scar on the motorsport world and a void in the hearts of fans. Decades earlier, another crash at that same corner nearly killed Jackie Stewart. Hanging upside down in his car, fuel leaking around him, Stewart survived and later became one of F1's loudest safety advocates, despite initially believing seatbelts were unnecessary. Even in the modern era, there are surprises. During practice at Monza, Carlos Sainz crashed heavily and, despite wearing his seatbelt, was flung harshly forward. Fans were alarmed, but the FIA explained that belts are designed to stretch, absorbing the impact, rather than transmitting it to the driver. Still, they reviewed the incident thoroughly, just as they now do after every major crash. Sometimes it's not the crash itself, but what happens afterward that changes the course of F1. In 2018, at the Azerbaijan Grand Prix, Red Bull teammates Max Verstappen and Daniel Ricciardo collided dramatically while fighting for position on the long straight. Verstappen moved under braking, Ricciardo went for a late overtake, and the result was a double DNF. After the race, Ricciardo didn't hold back. He admitted he was angry not just at Max but at the team. "I was more like, F***KU guys, he later said, frustrated that Red Bull hadn't intervened sooner to manage the situation. The crash deeply affected Ricciardo's decision to leave Red Bull. And while Verstappen went on to become a world champion, Ricciardo eventually returned, but only as a reserve driver to the very teammate who pushed him out. But if you think that was the most shocking modern crash, think again. At the 2022 British Grand Prix, Alfa Romeo's Guan Yu Zhou was launched upside down and skidded across the track at terrifying speed. His car flipped, crashed over the tire barrier, and got wedged between a fence and the gravel trap. The halo took the brunt of the impact again. Zhou later tweeted that the halo saved my life. Without it, the result could have been catastrophic. It was another shining example of how far F1 has come in terms of safety. But tragically, the halo didn't exist in 2014, when Jules Bianchi crashed at the Japanese Grand Prix. During wet conditions, Bianchi slid off the track and crashed into a 6,500 kilograms recovery crane that was clearing another car. He suffered severe head injuries and passed away the following year. The crash exposed fatal flaws in track safety procedures and race timing. In response, the FIA introduced the 4-hour rule for races nearing sunset, improved crane deployment protocol, and overhauled how wet conditions were managed during races. Sometimes, crashes don't result in death, but they spark big changes because of the gamesmanship involved. Over the years, certain drivers and teams have bent, or outright broken, the rules in pursuit of victory. From Schumacher parking his car on track at Monaco in 2006 to Red Bull's infamous flexible wings, many controversies have forced the FIA to take action. Drivers have gained unfair advantages, teams have exploited loopholes, and the result has often been a new rule, written after the fact, to stop it from ever happening again. So what happens when drivers force rule changes just to suit their own ambitions? What loopholes have been exploited so cleverly that the FIA had no choice but to close them? Who were the masterminds behind these bizarre but brilliant strategies? And how did their moves reshape F1 forever? These were the crashes that didn't just wreck cars, they shattered reputations, ended careers, and even took lives. But what if I told you some of the most game-changing moments in Formula One didn't come from accidents, but from drivers and teams who bent the rules, exploited loopholes, and forced the FIA to completely rewrite how the sport works? In the next part, we're diving into the controversial masterminds, those who didn't wait for permission and rewrote F1 history in the most unexpected ways. So don't go anywhere. Hit that next video, subscribe if you haven't already, and buckle up, because things are about to get even crazier.